All right, well, I'm Dr. Michael Babcock, and welcome to this session. Mindfulness is what the subject is going to be that we're going to be talking about. And you may be here because you have heard of that term and have an idea of what it is. It's been a concept that's been talked about a lot. A few years ago, it was a front page article in Time magazine that got a lot of buzz and a lot of information. But what is mindfulness? That's going to be the first thing we're going to be trying to answer in a moment. Why does it matter? Why is it something that we should care about? I've titled this presentation, Mindfulness for Students, Transforming How You Think and Live. Now that's a pretty big claim to make, right? Anytime you start talking about transformation, about how you think and live. But the sequence there is really important, because if we can transform how we think, then all different kinds of things happen as a result of that. And how we live and what happens in the course of our life can directly be impacted by how we manage our minds. And that's really what mindfulness comes down to. Let me just kind of start by wishing you happy Groundhog Day, which is what it is today, February 2nd. And that might throw you a little bit, but I have a method to my madness there. You remember the movie, the Bill Murray movie, if you've seen that? Where every morning, you don't remember that? He gets up, okay. Well, it's a wonderful comedy, because every morning when he gets up, Bill Murray, he relives the same day over and over and over again. And it's this kind of nightmare in a sense that he's in. And on Groundhog Day, as he's covering that story of what Groundhog Day is. And I was thinking about that today in relation to this topic on mindfulness, because maybe you've never had this experience. You're trying to go to sleep at night, and you just have so many things going through your brain, playing over and over and over again. It might be something that happened earlier in the day, and you just keep replaying it. Or it might be something that you're thinking about tomorrow, and you just keep kind of going through it. Okay, I'm the only person that ever has that problem, right? And it doesn't affect you, okay. Well, we all do, right? And that's kind of a Groundhog Day thing, right? You're just going over it and over it and over it. And sometimes what you want to just do is push the off button. You want to just flip the switch. And yet, it's not that easy to do, is it? If you analyze what's going on in your brain, moment by moment, if you ever just stop to do it, it can be kind of an amazing, but sometimes almost a little scary too. Just in terms of how much activity, how many thoughts, how many competing things are going on in your brain moment by moment. We're constantly living and thinking about the past. We're constantly thinking about the future. But what we seldom are doing is living and thinking in the present. And mindfulness is all about focusing the power of our minds and our attentions upon the present moment. And living in the present. And developing and cultivating the ability to do that. I'm going to give you a more precise definition than that, because I know that doesn't sound too deep and too novel and too amazing and so on, but it's actually a 2,000-year-old practice. It goes back to Eastern philosophies and so on. It's anchored in meditation practice, but you don't have to be a guru or a swami or be in a monastery to learn how to practice mindfulness. And yet that's the origin of it. And so what we're going to try to do is figure out what it is, why it matters, how it can help us, and how we can start thinking about living more in the present moment, and what kinds of transformations that can bring about to our lives. Well, let me just kind of say a couple of things about what mindfulness is not, because I just mentioned that the practice of mindfulness, of living in the present, of focusing your attention on the here and the now. And I mentioned that the practice of that goes back to meditation practices in Eastern philosophies. And you might say, oh, okay, wait a minute. Now I know what mindfulness is all about. Mindfulness must be about going into a trance or something like that. No, that's not what mindfulness is all about. It might be trying to blank your mind, just kind of shutting off all those inner voices and all those things that are going on and talking all the time with just that soundtrack that we can't shut off. Well, that's one of the things that can happen as we practice mindfulness, but it's not just about blanking out your mind. Is it just a positive thinking technique? Is that what it is? No, it's not. Just another gimmick, another formula or something, a relaxation technique. No, it's really much more than that. It is, in fact, if you look at the definition that I've given you on the handout, And you look right in the middle of the page there. Mindfulness has been defined as paying attention in a particular way. And what is that particular way? On purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. That's what mindfulness is all about. And there's a formal and an informal way that we understand practicing mindfulness. The formal way is meditation. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever tried meditation before. It's not necessary to practice mindfulness to do meditation. But the practice of meditation has as its goal cultivating that ability to focus the mind on the here and the now, the body, the feelings, the thoughts, what you're experiencing. Not being in the past, not being in the future, but being in the present right now. And that's the formal practice of it. Why? So that you can learn how informally to do that. When you're going about your everyday life, when you're a student, when you're juggling all of the things that we juggle in life, right? All of the things that kind of cause our brains to short circuit so many times, keep us awake at night, right? When we can't shut off the soundtrack in our head. Mindfulness, and the formal practice of learning as a meditation technique, gives us the ability and the tools in our everyday life to kind of enter into that place, that quiet place of the present moment, where we can de-center, de-stress, and really reduce all of those tensions and stresses of ordinary life. That's really what that definition is all about. Doing it intentionally, doing it now. What's that non-judgmental stuff? Well, we're going to get to that in a moment as well. But also look at the graphics that you have on the page. Look at the top left-hand corner. I'll describe this for the purpose of the video. There's a little cartoon in the upper corner. And I'm thinking of my dog Scruffy here as I look at that, because somebody's walking their dog. And you can see what's in the thought bubble that's in each head, right? The dog's head and the human's head. The human has all of this stuff going on. You see that? 1,000,001 things that are going on, just like a pinball machine inside the head. And boy, that describes how many times it is in the course of a stressful day. The dog, just perfectly peaceful in the moment. Okay? And the caption is the mind full? Like, is it full of stuff? Or are you mindful? And that's really kind of the issue, and that's kind of the question. And I think there's an urgency to this, there's a need for this. The reason why it's catching on in the Western world to such an extent is because we live in a digitally overloaded world right now, where we are assaulted by images and stuff and information. We live in the information age, right? And our brains are just constantly firing, our neurons are constantly firing with information. And to know how to not so much tune that stuff out, but know how just to kind of step into the solitude and the peacefulness and the tranquility of the present moment and not be stressed by that, not to be replaying what happened a moment ago, not worrying about what's going to happen in the next moment, but experiencing fully the here and the now. When you start doing that, you start enjoying life in a different way. And life becomes far less stressful and far more enjoyable. That's going to be one of the payoffs, as we're going to see, as we're going to talk about this. Let me just kind of suggest another way of thinking about what mindfulness is. Mindfulness can be thought of as one solution, one ancient solution to a very ancient problem. And that problem I've already given you. Our brains are very active. They don't know when to stop. Okay? It is one solution. I'm not saying it's the only solution, but it's one solution. And it has come down to us through the history and the practice of Eastern philosophy. Let me state it this way by way of making 4 statements. Number 1, thoughts are powerful. Would you agree with me on that? Thoughts are powerful. They're amazingly powerful. And in fact, there are many ways we can illustrate that, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. The second thing I would say is that feelings often follow our thoughts. And would you agree with that statement? You have a thought, and you can't get off that thought, and that thought kicks up certain feelings and reactions in you, right? And then those feelings have a tendency to take on a life of their own, don't they? And that's where we run into that problem. That's where we become overwhelmed by the thoughts and the feelings. Sometimes they're anchored in the past. Sometimes they're worried about the future. And those thoughts and those feelings become so powerful. In fact, I was thinking of a famous statement. You might know this quotation from the Bible. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Heard of that statement? That speaks of the power of thoughts As a person thinks in his heart, so is he. You know, in one of the great works of Buddhist literature, the Dhammapada, it states something very similar to that. It says that your actions follow your thoughts the way the tracks follow an ox cart. If you can picture that, right? An ox cart moving through a muddy rice field, let's say, and there are tracks that follow that. Your actions are going to follow your thoughts, just like the tracks of an ox cart. Another example that it says is that your shadow follows you, and your actions follow you, and your thoughts in the same way that your shadow follows you. So how we think, that's how we are, that's how we feel, that's how we live. So thoughts are powerful. Feelings often follow our thoughts. Third statement I want to give you is that one of the keys then to living well must be to learn how to manage our thoughts. Does that sound kind of logical? I mean, if thoughts are that powerful and if thoughts kick our feelings into gear, then maybe one of the keys to living well and living with a fullness in the moment is to learn how to manage our thoughts. But here's my fourth question. This is the problem. How can we do this? Since thoughts seem to have a life of their own. I said, we think thoughts have a life of their own. I'm the one who's in charge of what I think. Really? That's the problem. We're going to do a little thought experiment here in just a moment, but you're going to find maybe just a little uncomfortable. This is going to force you just to kind of close your eyes and think for a little bit and see what happens, what goes on in your mind. But bear with me on that. In ancient literature, this problem is described with some interesting metaphors. And that is that the mind is described as being like a monkey in a tree. I want you to think about that. A monkey jumping from branch to branch to branch. I don't know if that describes your mind, but it sure describes my mind. That monkey's just jumping from branch to branch. How do you control that? I want to control it because I know that controlling it might be a key to living well. Controlling my thoughts, controlling my feelings. And so how do I do that? Let's try to put this all together now. Okay? We know the problem. We have kind of the rough outline of mindfulness as a way, but how do you do that? How do you achieve that? How do you actually get to that point where you can control and live in the present? We're going to approach this. I'm going to give you like just a few steps we're going to work through together as a way of just kind of understanding how mindfulness works as a meditation practice and then as something that you can carry into your everyday life. Okay? Here's what we're going to do. Number one, I'm going to ask you to do this. We're not going to spend the next 5 minutes doing this, okay? My number one point here is watch your mind for 5 minutes. I challenge you to do this later today. Watch your mind. How do you watch your mind? Watch your mind for 5 minutes. Well, I'm going to give you a strategy that we are going to try to do right now, okay? And I'm going to do it with you. And as kind of uncomfortable, we don't like silence, do we? No, silence makes us uncomfortable, always does. But we're going to close our eyes, and I'm going to ask you to do the following. I'm going to ask you, this is a classic meditation technique. It's where every person who learns meditation learns to start with this. You focus on your breathing. And I'll explain why you do that. You think about your breathing, okay? You concentrate your attention on your breathing in and out. And the way you practice doing that is, very basic, you count the in-breath, out-breath, that's 1. Breathing in, breathing out, that's 2. Breathing in, breathing out. And here's what I'm going to ask you in just a second. I'm going to ask you just to kind of close your eyes and then to do that, focusing on your breath, if it helps to count in and out. 1, count to 10, and we'll just do that. And then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that, say a few more things about that. Let's do that. Let's close our eyes and let's just try that for a count of 10. Count 10 on that. Now, let me ask you just a couple things about that. I hope you were trying to focus on just the breathing. Did your mind cooperate with you? I have a yes and I have a no. Not completely. I mean, how would you describe what was going on in your brain? Why did it not cooperate with you?
Because you're constantly thinking about counting the breaths, not just about the breaths.
And it's not just that you're thinking about the counting and what you need to be doing, but did you notice other thoughts happen to shove their way in? That's that monkey in the tree. Okay?
My heartbeat.
Yeah. And then if you're honest with yourself, it's like, this is stupid. What am I doing? Okay, when's this going to be over? Yeah. And the thoughts come into your mind, right? I mean, we have to be candid about that. Every person who practices meditation, doesn't matter if they've been doing it for 20 years, they deal with that. But they're cultivating, they're learning how to. What are they doing? When you do that, when you're noticing that, and that's why I asked you the question, you're focusing on your thinking. You're thinking about your thinking. I want you to just reflect upon that. Because that's the first step to help you to free yourself from that endless kind of thinking loop. If you can step back and create some distance between you and your thinking, then you've made a tremendous step. That's why the meditation practice is so important. Because here's the thing, you're not supposed to, let's go back to that definition again. Paying attention in a particular way on the handout, on purpose, in the present moment, while you're counting from 1 to 10, right? That's what you're doing. Non-judgmentally. What's the non-judgmental stuff? Okay. Well, something pops into your mind. Something you forgot to do. Something you maybe need to do this afternoon. I like this. When I try to meditate, I feel like I'm wasting time. It's a horrible habit to overcome. You know? I'm thinking, gee, I need to be doing this. I need to be doing that. I'm making mental lists. When I'm done doing this, now I can really get busy doing something productive. And that's what we struggle with all the time, right? And then I start judging myself for that, right? And I start, feeling guilty about what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, and so on. That's why the non-judgmental part is such an important part of this. What you're trying to do is observe what is actually going on in your mind. And that's the first step. And that's why I encourage you, try that. Start really small. I mean, if meditation is something that you heard about and you wonder what the benefit of it is, I hope I'm giving you just a little bit of an insight here today as to how it can benefit you as a tool, a kind of a mental hygiene, if you will, in the sense of helping to clear the cobwebs out of your brain and to become aware. I'm not a prisoner of my thoughts. I can step back and I can observe my thoughts, non-judgmentally, but observing them. That's the first step. The second step I want to give you here, this happens with practice and with time. As you develop that practice of mindfulness in a formal setting, then step number 2, this is what you will notice. You'll begin to realize that you are not your thoughts. I'm going to state that again. You are not the same as your thoughts. You are not the same as your feelings. Now that is what researchers and psychologists have found to be one of the most important steps in this whole process. In terms of freeing you and helping you achieve a sense of well-being. That's how it can help to transform your life, by the way, and your thinking, the subtitle of this presentation today, right? When you realize, because again, when you're meditating, all kinds of thoughts might pop into your head. Maybe fear is something you struggle with, maybe self-doubt or anxiety, maybe a sense of inferiority or inadequacy. And then we tell ourselves those things, those thoughts that produce feelings, right? That's what's going on in our brain all the time. You don't want to be held prisoner by that. Be a victim of that. You want to be able to step back and look at those thoughts, right? When you realize that you have the capacity to do that, you realize, I am not the same as those thoughts, okay? And you realize, we say things like, I am angry, as though anger and me are the same thing, as opposed to looking at it and saying, I'm having an angry thought right now. That's different. You see that? Me saying, observing what's going on inside me and saying I have an angry thought or I'm having an anxious thought or something, that's separating me from the feeling, from the thought. And that's huge if you can do that. So it starts with entering into that present, watching your mind, cultivating the habit of doing that. By the way, you don't have to sit on a mat and cross your legs and do that in a meditation hall, okay? People do practice meditation in a formal way, but the formal always has the goal of taking it into your daily life in everything that you do, right? And you can cultivate that throughout your day. So the second thing, accept that you are not your thoughts. The third thing, label your thoughts and feelings. Label them. Okay? When you accept that I'm separate from my feelings and thoughts, that's good. But now be able to point to it as separate from you and say, like I said just a minute ago, that's a thought of fear or worry. And do you see how liberating that can be? when you do that, right? You take that step back, you're creating a gap between you and the feeling and the thought. And you're labeling it, not judgmentally, but identifying it for what it is. So it can be a powerful tool if you practice this and cultivate this way of thinking. And then the fourth point clinches the deal. And this is really, when you practice this is where the transformation can really happen. It's where you can move beyond your thoughts and feelings. The fourth point is, don't just react to thoughts and feelings. Make a choice. Don't just react. Now you're able to do that fourth point. Why? Because you've opened up distance between you and your thoughts, you and your feelings. If you just wrap yourself up in your thoughts and your feelings so that I am my thoughts and I am my feelings, then when I think something I react, and when I feel something I react, I have no power to do anything else, right? But when I cultivate and practice mindfulness, I step back from that. I see what's going on in my mind because I'm observing it. I recognize that I am able, like a spectator, to see those things that are going on. I'm able to label them for what they are. And then I'm able to make a choice about what I do with them. That's where the transformation happens. And as I said, psychologists have been studying this, and not just psychologists, but medical doctors have been studying this in places like Harvard, in places like pain, where they do pain management, or where they treat people with depression. There's all kinds of extraordinary work that's being done with mindfulness, and you know what it shows? It shows that it works. You know, we tend to live in a society where we think we have to have a prescription, and we have to have, you know, a drug for this and a drug for that, right? In order to fix our problems, to alter our minds and change our lives. And what mindfulness, this ancient practice, basically, is being demonstrated and proven that it's an amazing tool that's available to you, moment by moment, to cultivate and develop a kind of mastery of how to live in the present. Well, it allows you to break a cycle. It allows you to turn the switch off of that interior brain, that monologue, that interior voice that's going on and on and on. If you look at the illustration at the bottom of the handout I gave you, it kind of sums up the benefits of mindfulness in a really nice way. As we kind of wrap up, I'm going to give you some really practical things for you to take with you from this that you can start putting into practice. Research shows that regularly practicing mindfulness can improve well-being. Well-being is another way of saying happiness and satisfaction. A sense of being content with where you're at, who you are. And I would emphasize this, you know, just by way of saying the following, that mindfulness can help you to realize I can only be who I am. Sometimes we play that soundtrack in our minds over and over again. If only I had this, if only I were that, right? No, when you practice this living in the present, you realize what a joy and what a gift life in the present moment is if I will take it and live it, right? But it starts with recognizing I can only be who I am. Secondly, I can only live in the present. I can't live in the past. I can't live in the future. I can only live in the present. And thirdly, I can only be where I'm at right now. Those are three amazing statements that have a lot of power in them when you think about it. And this practice of mindfulness, rooted in an ancient practice of meditation, is a technique to bring us to the point where we accept those points, those realities in our life. And so again, research shows that regularly practicing this can improve well-being in so many ways. It can lower stress, as it says here, and lead to improved psychological functioning. There's another thing it can do. It helps you to be more empathetic and more compassionate and more engaged with the people around you. And I think that's huge as well, because if you're truly awake to the moment, okay, let's be real. We have this experience, don't we? Somebody's talking to us and we're zoning out. Again, that's not just something, I'm guessing that I'm the only person who ever does that. Okay, yeah. And what's happening? You're not in the present, you're not mindful, you're not aware, right? And we don't intend it, but that's kind of treating that person in a fairly dismissive, disrespectful way, right? As opposed to being fully engaged in that moment, being mindful. And that's where there's a sense of compassion that comes from that as an expression of our well-being to somebody else. Well, how can this help you as a student? I hope you see already how powerful and how helpful this can be. To practice this, to cultivate this, to start thinking and practicing in these ways. But let me just give you three quick ways to cultivate a practice of mindfulness in your own life. I would encourage you, number one, to find a time each day when you can deliberately practice mindfulness. That is the formal practice. Call it meditation if you want to. It's no big deal. You don't have to go into a trance, as we said. It's not something spooky about it. It's a matter of just focusing and centering on the present and watching your mind. Your heart rate will go down. There's a sense of tranquility that's going to come over you as you do that. You'll become less stressed, and it will become a grounding for you you can come back to throughout the day. It doesn't have to be much. You don't have to sit there for an hour. Try 5 minutes, and then cultivate that and build from that, and build from that. The practice is very simple. Just find a simple, quiet place. You sit comfortably in a posture that's comfortable to you, and practice the breathing exercise that I give you. That's the way to start. That's the way to begin. Number two, go beyond that, though. That's the formal. The second point is incorporate mindfulness into your everyday activities. Now, this might really challenge you, because you know what? Let me say that again, incorporate mindfulness into your everyday activities. Most of us, we go through life trying to multitask, doing multiple things all at once. And guess what? When we try to multitask, we do everything badly, because we can't focus on everything simultaneously. You can only focus on one thing, okay? And that's what, again, the importance of mindfulness is all about. So, if you're eating, focus on eating. Be mindful. Do you just gobble down your food because you're rushing from here to there? Unfortunately, that's so true of our society, isn't it? In Buddhist monasteries, you know what they do? Eating is a very serious meditation practice. Now, I'm just saying you have to do this because, in our society, that may not be the way we would do it. But everybody can be mindful and focus on what they eat. And eat more slowly. And actually notice what you're eating. How about that, right? And reflect upon it. In fact, let me tell you this. You'll find this interesting. Here's a traditional Buddhist technique for teaching new monks how to eat mindfully. Take a raisin. Take one raisin, put it in your mouth, and eat it very, very slowly. And try to get every sensation and every taste and every flavor from that. Try to extract every sensation and experience you can from that one raisin. That's pretty extreme, right? And yet that's a way of teaching oneself to think, okay, if I were to live mindfully, if I were to eat mindfully, how am I going to extract everything from the present, because the present's all I've got, as I possibly can. So incorporate mindfulness into your everyday activities. Every activity, whether you're cleaning something, whether you're walking, when you're speaking, speak mindfully. Well, that's a huge piece of advice right there, right? That we can all benefit from. Speak, but don't just open your mouth and speak, but speak aware, mindfully of that experience. And I think that we'll find that we'll use our words and interact with people in a much different way when we practice and incorporate mindfulness moment by moment. Doing everything that you do with that sense of awareness and purpose and intention in the present. That's what we really mean. The third point, how to help you as a student and how to cultivate this in your life. The third point is to learn to refocus yourself throughout the day when you get stressed and overwhelmed or just too busy or distracted. And you know that. Your body tells you when you're at that point, right? Your mind tells you when you're at that point. Learn how to take mini breaks, mini retreats, right? And there are all kinds of ways of doing that. If you have the opportunity, just close your eyes and take 3 purposeful breaths mindfully. And that will make a huge difference. It's a way of coming back to that grounding again, right? It might be while you're waiting for the light to change, right? It could be at any point where you just have a moment where you can just come back to and refocus and live in the present and be mindful. Well, let me leave you with those 3 statements one more time, because I think that's worth repeating. All we have, right, is who we are right now. I can only be who I am. I can only live in the present. And I can only be where I'm at right now. We mortgage so much of our present for the future, hypothetical future, don't we? We're racing around, we're thinking about what we're going to do next, or what we hope to do in a year, or what we want to do and what we want to be, and how much money we want in our bank account in 10 years. And we spend so much time focused on those things, or living in the past and regret and so on, that we mortgage the present. I can only be who I am, I can only live now, and I can only be where I'm at right now. I encourage you, cultivate the practice of mindfulness and see if it doesn't give you a workable strategy for handling the many pressures of life that we have. All right, thank you very much.